Thank you, Eric. My focus is on old photographs and what we can learn from them if we study them. And there's some amazing stories, I think, that have been untold that with a little research, we can get fascinating stories. This photo on my first slide is not from a forgotten pack trip. It was actually the 1909 pack trip to Rainbow Bridge, which brought to the world's attention the existence of that bridge. But nevertheless, photos like this help us fill in some of the missing history of unforgotten pack trips as well. This is a roster of the Park Service staff nationwide in 1917, and you can see it was a pretty small group of people. And not all of them were paid. Most of these people at the bottom who are listed custodians of national monuments were essentially what we today call volunteer positions. I want to draw your attention to John Wetherill, who is custodian of Navajo National Monument, which is way to the east of here, out towards Monument Valley. He was actually inherited by the Park Service after serving with the General Land Office in that position starting in 1909. And I think a number of these other custodians were probably in the same situation. John Wetherill was my great-grandfather. You also notice Rainbow Bridge didn't have a custodian, but my great-grandfather was kind of the de facto custodian of Rainbow Bridge National Monument. Part of his duties, in addition to watching over the monuments, was to take people to them. And in the case of Navajo and Rainbow Bridge, it was a long horseback ride. Once you got to the Wetherills trading post to get to these monuments, some of the visitors would also want to come to the Grand Canyon National Monument. And you can imagine how long a horseback ride that would have been from up towards the Four Corners, the Monument Valley area, all the way over here. There was no vehicle access to where my great-grandparents lived at that time. I'll talk a little bit more about their history and how they ended up out in that country. But one of the treasures of my family is literally thousands of old photographs. This is not all of them, but just a sampling. And when we inherited them, they were kind of in random order. And it wasn't obvious what the significance of some of them were, but by studying them, we learn all kinds of things. So it's quite a resource for our family history, and I think also for the history of this part of the country. Wetherills settled in Mancos, Colorado in about 1880. It was fairly early for that region. The parents of the family were Benjamin and Marion. They had a daughter, Anna, and 5 boys. John was my great-grandfather and his brothers. The parents had a Quaker background. BK was from Pennsylvania. And the Quaker teachings that they had brought out west influenced their appreciation of Native American culture. And they were quite distinct in their ways of dealing with the Native Americans than most of the other settlers. They built a ranch, and one of the important times in their history was when Richard Wetherill and his brother-in-law Charlie Mason were rounding up cattle up on Mesa Verde and looked across the canyon and saw this village out in the alcove, which later became known as Cliff Palace. At about 1900, the Wetherill brothers were getting tired of living in a little town. They wanted more remote country and started moving out into the Navajo country. John and his wife Louisa went to Ojo Alamo, New Mexico, and ran a trading post. That was a very remote spot. And Richard, the oldest brother, moved down to Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Then in 1906, John had married Louisa Wade, that's the two of them there, and they decided to go to even a more remote area where there are no non-Indians living. It was a place called Old Chato in the Navajo country west of Monument Valley. And they built this house and trading post, pretty primitive operation, but they were very happy to be living there with the local people. The Navajo and Paiute Indians there didn't speak English and still lived in their traditional ways, but the Wetherills were able to speak their language and became good friends with them. Slightly after that, scientists started getting interested in that area, and the Wetherill house became a staging point for expeditions. In 1909, the government decided to make a national monument to protect the cliff dwellings in the area, but they needed somebody to look after the monument, and they wouldn't have done it without somebody. So my great-grandfather said, "I will gladly look out for the ruins without pay until such time as a regular superintendent can be appointed." And it turns out, so he was the first custodian of Navajo National Monument. Turns out he was in that position for about 28 years. In 1909, based on some information Louisa had received, an expedition was formed to look for a huge natural bridge out in the rough country west of Old Chato. And this was about a 70-mile horseback ride through some of the most rugged country imaginable. They came around the bend, and there was the magnificent Rainbow Bridge. The people on the expedition had the foresight to recognize that it needed to be protected, even though it was so remote that you would wonder at that time whether very many people would ever see it. So they recommended designation of that as a national monument as well. So I want to first talk about one little photo album of my great-grandfather's that has a number of photos, but they're all unidentified. We know that some of them are from the 1909 Rainbow Bridge Discovery Expedition. This is actually a pretty well-known photograph, and it shows 11 of the participants in the expedition. It turns out there were 14 participants, so there are 3 of them that are missing. One of them was the photographer, Stuart Young, and another was a Navajo wrangler, Dog-Eye Begay. But the 14th person has been a mystery. Nosja Begay, a Paiute guide who led the group on the last day through some incredibly rugged country. And as far as we know, there was no photo of him taken in 1909. So people have wondered, is there a photograph of Nosja Begay? And I'm going to resume that discussion a little later. Also in the same photo album are some pictures from a different expedition. And we know that because there's a woman in this one. This top photo, there are a couple of people standing up on Rainbow Bridge. And that photo was reproduced in Herbert Gregory's Geology of the Navajo Country book. Fortunately, he gives attribution to the photographer, A.R. Townsend, so we know who the photographer was and who one of the expedition members was on this trip. This is the register from Rainbow Bridge, and I think this was written after the fact by John Wetherill, but he says Arthur Townsend and Helen Townsend, and it says she was the first woman to visit the bridge and the first to go on top of the bridge. So we know that one of the people in that photo was her up on top. Also, thanks to Jeannie Valentine, great-granddaughter of W.W. Bass, we have the Bass Hotel Register, which shows the same group here at the Grand Canyon. Incredibly, on September 3rd of 1909, John Wetherill was at Rainbow Bridge on August 14th, so think of having to go back to Old Jato, re-outfit, ride his horse all the way to the Grand Canyon, and meet up with the Townsends there. We also see that it was Miss Townsend, this brother and sister, was Eleanor Rodman Townsend. So found in the same album is this photo, and this is John Wetherill here and Miss Townsend at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Anybody recognize the location of this? We struggled, Sandra knows because she helped re-identify it along with Shores, the ranger down at Phantom Ranch. It's just downstream of the Black Bridge on the south side of the river. So I wondered how they could have gotten down there, because this is before there was a South Kaibab Trail, and Michael Anderson helped me with that. This is an old map that shows coming down the Bright Angel Trail across the Tonto level and dropping off the Tonto on the old cable trail, which preceded the South Kaibab Trail. I always thought that there must be some other Townsend photos besides the handful that I had. And this is an amazing story. I recently was contacted by a man who had rescued 3 photo albums out of a landfill with about 750 photos, and he didn't know anything about them. And it turns out they were the rest of the Townsend collection. And this is just a sampling of some of those that I think it's going to be a lot of fun getting good images and re-photographing some of these places that they went in 1909. And we even have a picture of Mr. Townsend. I want to talk about some other photos and a different expedition, and this was kind of puzzling. These are both Kolb brothers photos, and it's identified as Bob Chandler, Jester Tompkins, John Wetherill, Bert Hyman, and a New York girl. Well, we know who John Wetherill is. His uncle was Justice Tompkins. Bert Hyman was a friend of theirs from Mancos, Colorado. But who is Mr. Chandler and who is the New York girl? We also have this photo that was signed by Robert, and it's Chandler, no D. We have a date, 1912, November. So that helps us pin it down a little bit. And then looking at newspaper articles, we find that ex-sheriff Robert Winthrop Chandler of New York, millionaire, divorced husband of Lena Cavalieri, the famous prima donna, grandson of John Jacob Astor, and rural painter. And then another article that says that he was a guest with his wife. The problem with that is after he divorced Lena Cavalieri, he never remarried. So we know that article is not exactly right. There again, the Rainbow Bridge Registry is helpful. Here's Bob going to Rainbow Bridge. He was known as Fighting Bob, Dutchess County. The New York girl didn't seem to be with him at that time. But it has an interesting comment, who is loony now? What does that mean? It turns out Robert Chandler was one of the Astor orphans, 8 children who lost their parents and were raised in this mansion. They were kind of spoiled and inherited a fortune when they grew up. This article says that it talks about when their older brother John came of age, some of the younger brothers and sisters had him committed to a mental institution, and he escaped and didn't have to go back. Well, Bob, the one that came to Rainbow Bridge and Grand Canyon, talked this Italian opera singer into marrying him, and she said, "I will if you sign over your fortune to me." So he did. After the wedding, she promptly left. And so the older brother, John, sent him a telegraph saying, "Who's loony now?" And he also sent it to the newspapers, so it became a popular catchphrase in American society, all directed at this man who had come to the Grand Canyon. So that still leaves the question of who the New York girl is. And recent research identifies her as Clemence Randolph, New York actress and playwright who was a companion of Bob Chandler. Nasha Begay, the Paiute guide, in probably the 70s, this article was found with Zane Grey sitting next to a man, and it said it was Nasha Begay. In Nanazoshi Boko, which is Rainbow Bridge Canyon, well, the scenery doesn't match. Zane Grey looks too young, but the real thing is there's a copy of the article in which Zane Grey says this picture is a publisher's mistake. My apologies to our friend, the real Nasha Begay. Unfortunately, this picture has been reproduced in numerous books identifying the man as Nasha Begay. So the question is, who is the Paiute man? And still the question, is there a picture of Nasha Begay? Well, through the scenery in the picture, we've identified the background is north of Lee's Ferry, where Zane Grey went through in 1907 and 1908. So we at least are starting to pin down the circumstances of the photo. John took Zane Grey to Rainbow Bridge in 1913, but a little later that year, he also took Teddy Roosevelt. And we have these two scenes from a campsite along that route. With this little section of a mesa in the background, we were able to identify that spot as being east of Navajo Mountain. We also noticed 3 Native American men, and Teddy's standing next to one here. Another photo shows the same man on a section of the Rainbow Bridge Trail guiding Teddy. So Teddy's back here, and this man. So we're quite sure that's Nasha Begay, and we do have an authentic picture of him now by studying these old pictures. This is a picture taken just a little later of Teddy when he got up to the same spot. And another value of these old photos is this section of the trail hasn't been used since 1933. There are no maps of it, but by taking the photos out there, we can retrace where the old photos were. And it's kind of fun to do that. I just wanted to conclude by saying that this is kind of a fun project, but it also, I think, has some important lessons we can learn. One is the perspective of how important these places like the Grand Canyon, these national monuments, have been to people down through the decades. And the journey those pioneer travelers took was quite an experience, life-changing experience. A woman that John took to Rainbow Bridge in 1919 said, "We had a sense of courage towards life new to us all. The mere fact of our remoteness helped us shake off layers and layers of other people's personality, which we had falsely regarded as our own, and showed us new selves undreamed of." So the importance of protecting these places, I think our appreciation for that is enhanced by studying these old photographs. Thank you.